Hello, my name is Ralf Friedrichs. I'm an addiction recovery coach and the host of the Take Your Life Back Today show. As an addiction recovery coach, I want to share something with you, and let me be crystal clear to leave an everlasting impact upon you. Just imagine being buried alive. You're in a coffin, but you know you're not dead. You don't know how to get out of that coffin, so you start trying to lift the lid, but the lid won't budge. You know why? Because the dirt upon the lid is way too heavy. You then say to yourself, okay, maybe if I bang on the lid, I can unsettle the dirt that's upon the lid, and maybe somebody else dig their way down towards me. This is what it's like to find yourself at the lowest point of alcohol and drug addiction. You know you need help, you know you can't do it on your own, but you don't know where to turn for help. In reality, though, people are probably standing by waiting to help you. You just don't know that. You just think you're going to, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get this all adjusted. You're just going to die. In reality, though, people don't think about death when they're habitually abusing drugs and alcohol. In order to defeat an addiction, you have to be great at repressing the fear of death. I often ask you, my audience, did it ever cross your mind while you were abusing drugs and alcohol that maybe, just maybe, you might be taking your life in your own hands? In other words, God is not directing your life because you chose to do drugs and alcohol. You might overdose. And when you do that, your life is gone, like this person. More selfishly, you're taking your life away from your children, your grandchildren, husband and wife, mother, father, grandfather. You're taking your life away. That is like committing murder, folks. With this, let me leave one last thought. Don't be the person that I'm reading about on these index cards that waited and waited until it was too late. Instead, be like the person that makes the phone call and calls me at 844-405-HELP, and I promise you, I will help you take back your life before your life is gone. People like Larry Geist from the Geist Academy at 516-458-2741. Larry Geist and I always tell folks like you, it doesn't matter where you've been, it doesn't matter where you came from. What matters most is that you are seeking help. You want a better today and a brighter tomorrow. Go to him at www.odysseyconsult.org. Larry Geist from the Geist Academy, 516-458-2741. Larry Geist and I will wait here to hear from you. You can call me at 844-405-HELP. Folks, as you know, my mother was tragically killed walking across the street. A truck came, pretty much stopped at the red light to make a right on red or right on a green arrow. The line is 10 feet away. My mother's on the walkway. This truck pulled up within a foot away from my mother. My mother being 5'1", the truck being a Dodge Ram with a high hood, tragically ran over my mother and killed her. Do I want revenge or do I want justice? Let's not confuse the two, because there is a difference between revenge and justice. So let's talk about that. The terms revenge and justice often get muddled. That's hardly surprising for the course of history. They frequently are used interchangeably. You may even be familiar with the phrase, just revenge. Still, as meanings alter and evolve over time, the connotation of these two words have increasingly diverged. Now, it's uncommon to see them used simultaneously. And, doubtless, revenge has borne the brunt of various semantic changes that have transpired. Yet certain overlaps between and ambiguities within the two terms do exist. So before delineating the chief distinction that can usefully be made to separate them, let me at least hint at some of these two inconsistencies that might be. And let's fix this camera a little bit because I want you to be able to see me. Okay, I think we have it now. Let's see. It would be convenient in advance the claim that justice is fair and revenge is not. But as words, just revenge, suggest, revenge, depending on its underlying condition, motivations, and execution, might be either just or unjust, fair or frankly outrageously out of proportion to the wrong originally done. There seems to be an equivocally tightly woven into the term that's less perceptible in the related concept of justice. All the same, The well-known phrase miscarriage of justice warns us to be careful about distinguishing between concepts that finally must be understood at both relative and subjectively. Although I believe that the difference between revenge and justice enumerated below generally hold true, I'd emphasize that they are generalizations, so you probably be able to think of some exceptions. There are instances when revenge can be legitimately be understood as a type of justice, and justice a kind of revenge. Moreover, as discrete as I've tried to make each of the 5 categories below, a certain amount of resemblance and repetition has been unavoidable. That is, my divided lines may at times seem a bit arbitrary, but in any case, here are, each concluding its own set of supporting questions. In fact, as a prelude to our discussion, let's start with 2 quotes that affirm the idea that revenge and justice ought to be distinguished. Do not seek revenge and call it justice. Cassandra Clare said that. It is essential that justice be done. It is equally vital that justice not be confused with revenge, for the two are wholly different. Oscar Arias wrote that. Revenge, in a predominantly emotional justice, primarily rational, revenge is mostly about acting out, typically through violence, markedly negative emotions. At its worst, it expresses a hot, overwhelming desire for bloodshed. As preserved as it may seem, there is a critical pleasure, or actual pleasure experience in causing others to suffer for hurt that they have caused the avenger or self-perceived victim, the less personal type. Justice, as logically, legally, and ethically defined, isn't really about getting even or experience a spiteful joy in retaliation. Instead, it's about righting a wrong that most members of society, as opposed to simply alleged victim, would agree is morally culpable, and presumably unbiased, unemotional. Moral rightness of justice is based on cultural or community standards of fairness and equity, whereas revenge has a certain selfish quality to it. Cool justice is selfish, and it relies on non-self-interest established law. At least obliquely, the 2 quotes below are suggestive. The 2 quotes are as follows. But men often mistake killing and revenge for justice. They seldom have the stomach for justice. Robert Jordan wrote that. Here's another one. Social justice cannot be attained by violence. Violence kills what it intends to create. Pope John Paul II wrote that. Revenge is, by nature, personal justice, is impersonal, impartial, and both social and legal phenomenon. The driving impetus behind revenge is to get even, to carry out a private vendetta, or to achieve what, subjectively might be described as personal justice. If successful, the party perceiving itself as gravely injured, though others might not necessarily agree, experience considerable gratification. Their way of getting back is by getting revenge, and that revenge seems to be achievable by acting aggressively. The other side, vanquished or brought to its knees, just not the avenger, feels justified. Their quest for revenge has pre-empowered them, and from their bias point of view, it's something they're fully entitled to. On the other hand, social justice is impersonal. It revolves around moral correction in situations where certain ethical and cultural vital principles have gone out and have, in particular, received retribution benefits, or protects both the individual and society, which can operate effectively only when certain acceptable behavioral guidelines are followed. So consider this. Revenge is a kind of wild justice, which a more man's nature runs to. The more ought law to weed it out. Francis Bacon said that. Justice cannot be for one side alone, but must be for both. Eleanor Roosevelt said that. All calls for justice require that victims feel avenged, and revenge is never just of its disproportionate. Vane Rosenbaum. peace is more important than all justice, and peace was not made for the sake of justice, but justice for the sake of peace. Martin Luther King said that. We continue as follows. Revenge is an act of vindictiveness, justice, of vindication. The intense effort to avenge oneself, others can easily become corrupting, morally reducing the avenger's status to that of the perpetrator. Two wrongs do not make a right, and ethically speaking, never can. Degrading another one only ends up further degrading oneself, I have to say. Even if the kind of justice might be served through an act of revenge, it could still be argued that there's nothing particularly admirable or evolved in retaliating against a wrong by committing a like wrong, or, to put it in more emphatically, to behave vengefully is, at its best, to take the low road to justice. In opposition, justice is grounded in assumptions, conventions, and doctrines having to do with honor, fairness, and the virtue. Its purpose is really not to be vindictive, that it is bloodthirsty, has no impact or should have no impact in the precepts of justice, at least not the way the term is presently employed. It's based on established law, and the proceedings of that law are designed to dispense individually precisely what they deserve for the crimes committed. Nothing more, nothing less. The following quotes allude to some of the dimensions of the core differences. There can be no greater motivator for evil than the huge sense of injustice. Bill Ward said that. Only remember this: to seek justice is good and noble thing to seek. Revenge out is hatred, something that will devour your very soul. James Mace. In human history, the desire for revenge and the desire for loot have often been closely associated. John McCarthy. Listen to this. In the human history, the desire for justice and the desire for loot have often been closely associated. Revenge is about cycles. Justice about closure. Revenge has a way of relentlessly repeating itself as an interminable fuse such as Hatfield's and McCoy's, and ever more meticulously at that. Revenge typically begets more revenge. Whether it's individual or entire nation, it takes a place within a closed system that seems able to feed on itself indefinitely. Unlike tic-tac-toe, tit for tat is a game without end. One side gets satisfaction, the other side is driven to get its satisfaction, and then, theoretically, ad infinitum. There can be no resolution, no compromise. For each faction, say Israel and Palestine, has clan-like its own agenda, its own sense of right and wrong, and righteous rigidity of each side usually demands that some trusted outsider intervene in the matters that are to be settled. Justice, in contrast, is designed by individual or official, generally not linked to the two opposite camps, to offer a resolution more likely to, be more balanced, especially if, in fact, it is just and equitable. And when justice is done, and I use the word advisably, so is the conflict that led up to the injustice in the first place. Beyond that, punishment is for wrongdoing carry an agreed upon authority lacking in personnel vengeful acts, which calculates solely to get back at the assumed perpetrator. Technically speaking, so-called vigilante justice isn't really justice or social justice at all, though at times it may appear to be. Now, taking matters into your own hands may sometimes seem justified, but hardly meets the more rigorous criteria for consensual or community justice. Here are some quotes that focus on the problematic lack of closure commonly associated with revenge. But if revenge is called justice, then that justice breeds yet more revenge, and then becomes a chain of hatred. P. Naruto. It is unfortunate that most cases when the sins of the father fall on the son of it because people refuse to forget, heap past wrongs upon innocent generations that follow, which I add is anything but justice. E.A. Buchanan. Those who wish to punish the current and future generations for iniquities of a generation long gone, and who equate justice with revenge are more and most dangerous people in the world. Dean Koontz. Revenge is about retaliation. Justice is about restoring balance. The motive of revenge has mostly to do with expression of hate, rage, or spite. It's a protest or a payback, and its foremost intent to harm another person. In and of itself, it's not primarily about justice, but about the victims affirming their inborn but not legal right to retaliate against some wrong done to them. And because it's so impassionate, it's typically disappropriate to the original injury, meaning that it usually can't be viewed as just. The punishment may fit the crime, but it's often blown out of response to another perceived offense, and I use the qualifier perceived purposely here. Take the Florida case of George Zimmerman, fatal 2012 shooting of Trayvon Martin. Not only does an instance exemplify the wrongness of something linked to vigilante justice, but as many, if most people would agree, Zimmerman's ultimate acquittal represent a serious miscarriage of justice, especially in the light of the gunman's antisocial conduct and legal infractions subsequent to the case. On the contrary, justice is concerned with dispassionately restoring balance through bringing about equality, or better, equity. It centers on proportion as it equates to fairness, not driven by emotion. Restorative justice, meted out by the court of law, seeks to be objective and even-handed as possible. It's not as so much revenge, but about doing the other side one better, but about equitably or properly punishing wrongdoing. In fact, the ancient law of the Italian, an ethical standard originating in Babylonian law and present as well in the Bible and the Roman law, focuses on what is commonly known, but hopefully only metaphorically, as the eye for an eye conception of justice. In brief, that kind of magnitude of justice, meted out, it contrived to correspond as exactly as possible to the gravity of the original injury. And the group of quotes below should further illustrate this final distinction between revenge and justice. Christians' ethics demands that you should not take revenge. The paradox is naturally that Christians worship God, who is the greater avenger of them all. Defy him and you burn in eternal hell, an act of revenge which is completely out of proportion to the crime. Joe Nisbo wrote that. Here's another one. God was never what we would call a proportionalist. God goes postal a lot, which is what human societies won't let their people do. William Ian Miller. Here's another one. Someone wrongs us, we rarely, if ever, want to do the same thing back. Why? Because we want to do something more harmful. Likewise, when someone insults us, our instinct is to search for a word that is more insulting than what they just utilized on us. Revenge always be more insulting than anything because it escalates to a higher way of getting back. And lastly, a society built upon a foundation of vengeance is a society doomed to destroy itself. This was written by Rich E. Goodrich. Folks, there is a huge difference between justice and revenge. How do I feel about the person that killed my mother? I seek justice because revenge will not bring my mother back. Justice, which I have been informed is almost impossible to achieve because there was no crime committed according to the laws written today. Those laws written today need to be amended. They need to be modified to actually hold somebody responsible that crosses a white line, which is not a criminal act, stops a foot away from the crosswalk, which is not a criminal act, doesn't see my mother, and fatally runs her down. No criminal activities were performed according to the laws written today. However, my justice comes from the Lord Jesus Christ. God gave this particular person a thing called conscience. Remember being a kid and stealing something, or maybe doing something wrong, and you had to go through the day thinking about, oh my God, what if I get caught? What have I done? Well, this 24-year-old that committed this, I can't even say crime, that committed this tragic killing, legal killing, I guess you could call it, has a thing called the conscience that he will never ever escape from. The only way to escape the conscience is not to exist. So he got the worst punishment that even Suffolk County couldn't have given him. Even a year in jail wouldn't make that up. He, at 24, has to live maybe another 60 years with a thing called the conscience. Because the last thing that he'll remember from that tragic day is thump, thump, my mother's body under his Dodge Ram. That is more punishment. That is justice. That is God's justice. A thing called conscience. And I praise God. And I ask God to never have this individual forget what he did. Not because I want him to suffer. Absolutely not. Because I want him to be more careful in the future. Because that could have been our grandchildren. It could have been your mother, your father, your grandmother. It could have been your child. No justice can be worse than the justice dispensed by the Lord Jesus. I hope to God that this difference between justice and revenge is clear enough for you to understand. That most times when we seek justice, we tend to seek revenge, and we cannot do that. For revenge causes wars. Justice gives a punishment for the crime committed. Revenge is from the hatred of the heart, usually from the devil. I hope you have a great day, and I hope you enjoyed this segment. And tomorrow's segment will be actually a pretty good segment. It's about younger people, how they feel about new relationships, what are the do's and don'ts about relationships. And I will be interviewing someone tomorrow, hopefully, if that person shows up. That is a younger person that is going through a relationship, and these little tips could help this person improve their relationship. So stay tuned, and I'll see you tomorrow.